Come with me and you'll be in a kitchen rehabilitation, watching paint dry slowly in a video of my creation.
The suspense is terrible. He's gonna go this time. I hope it'll last.
Everyone knows that a great PJ starts with the caulk. Paint job, you pervert! You get a prep by plugging the holes and filling the cracks. I used automotive body filler for the big holes that I happened to misplace in an ADHD moment, spackle for the smaller holes and cracks, automotive spot filler for the fine holes, painter's caulk for the change in planes, and Astroglide for the really tight holes. Most of my cabinets were either new or in good condition, so I ended up using spot filler the most. Make sure to wear an appropriate respirator while applying. It spreads thin easily with a spreader. Eventually it'll look like someone was murdered in the kitchen! Make sure to hide the evidence by sanding smooth. Some spots might require a little extra smoothing or leveling. This crown molding was a little warped when I installed it, so I took the hand plane to it. After hand planing, I reapplied spot putty, waited for it to dry, and re-sanded smooth. The new cabinets and the ones that I built didn't require any touch-up, so I just hand sanded with 120 grit. I sanded the recycled cabinets until the finish looked hazy, like the smoke billowing out of the mystery machine. We all know why Shaggy and Scooby always had the munchies. In some spots, I switched over to my finish sander and busted out my best Captain Morgan impression. There's a bit of debate about whether you should stick your caulk in the crack between the panel and the frame of the cabinet doors. Answers will depend on the amount of humidity in the air, the seasonal temperature changes, and her excuses, like, my tummy hurts, or maybe tomorrow, and even, I'm sleepy. If your cabinet doors are solid hardwood, you might not want to caulk them. Or depending on your persuasion, you might want to. Do whatever makes you horny. My wife helped me sand the cabinet doors. Hooray, teamwork! If you're painting cabinets that aren't brand new, you might want to clean them before you sand. Otherwise, you'll end up grinding the grease into your cabinets. To clean the cabinets, I mixed up some trisodium phosphate substitute. I mixed the powder in a big bucket and then cleaned the cabinets with a sponge. Scrub-a-dub-dub! After all the kitchen surfaces had been cleaned, I wiped everything off with a damp rag. Tedious. Very tedious. Last time I did this much wiping was after my last visit to Taco Bell. Now that the cabinet doors are clean, I can get to priming. I used an airless sprayer to prime the cabinets. Learning how to spray was a little tricky, and it took me a while to really understand how to do it. Sometimes things are just going perfectly, and then the spray gun clogs. See what I mean? Turning the tip around backwards clears the clog. The frequency of clogging can be reduced by thinning the paint and or increasing the pressure. You want to make sure that you have 50% overlap in your spray pattern, otherwise you get these tiger stripes. Here's my wife doing a great job at keeping an even distance from the face of the cabinet, about 1 foot away. I tried to prime these cabinet doors laying down, but that worked about as well as Stephen Hawking trying to do a backflip. Eventually, all the cabinets were a solid color, and I felt like I hit the jackpot. That feeling of success faded faster than Carly Rae Jepsen's music career. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's our sub-link, so subscribe maybe. When the primer dries, a lot of flaws that weren't visible before priming will become evident. Little sections will need to be re-caulked. Keep in mind that caulk shrinks a little when drying, and also when cold. Some little dents and dings that are still visible can be fixed with the murder juice. Spots that show excessive cracking are likely due to poor adhesion. These spots need to be stripped down like Kim Kardashian with Ray J and re-cleaned. I worked my way through the rest of the kitchen, filing, sanding, and smoothing the rest of the cabinets. The more time spent on this step, the better the final finish will be. When I was happy with how smooth everything was, I vacuumed off all the cabinets and then used a tack cloth on them to get them spotless. Kinda like Martha Stewart's criminal record. Okay, maybe that wasn't the best analogy. Kinda like Snoop Dogg's criminal record. I tried to paint a slightly lighter coat for the second coat to reduce the chance for runs. Cause let's be honest here, nobody likes the Hershey squirts. I wet sanded these little shits with a foam sanding block and a rubber sanding block with 400 grit wet dry sandpaper. For the detailed areas, I dry sanded with a micro zip finger sander.
Trying to paint the cabinet doors while they're laying flat was taking way too long, so we mounted a wire shelf and decided to hang them to spray. We drilled 3 32" holes and mounted cup hooks in each of the cabinet doors. Then we could hang the cabinet doors on hangers while they're getting sprayed and spray them all at once.
I decided to use Sherwin-Williams Emerald Urethane trim enamel for the uppers and the lowers. I used Medici Ivory for the uppers and Moscow Midnight for the lowers. There are better paints that you can use for painting cabinets, like pre-catalyzed lacquers, 2K polys, and whatever the fuck else, I don't know. But those require some pretty hardcore PPE and will leave your house smelling like Jesse and Walter had been.
I still hadn't learned a solid technique to painting the cabinets by the time I got to spraying the upper cabinets. I pretty much just spray and prayed like a high school kid in an abstinence-only school. It's extremely helpful to use a flashlight to find the runs. Shine them over the edge of the cabinet doors at a steep angle to reveal the drips. To fix the runs, lightly wet sand with 400 grit wet dry sandpaper, clean, and then respray. Eventually I started to get the hang of things. I found it easiest to spray the inside of the face frames first and then spray the faces. We want long, smooth strokes while keeping the spray gun as perpendicular to the cabinet as possible. The spray gun needs to stay about a foot away from the cabinet at all times. Start to spray while off the edge of the cabinet, release when off the other edge, and overlap 50%. The more robotic the motions, the better the result. Pick a pattern, up and down, or side to side, and try to stick with it. And if your partner says, slow down, speed up, or right there, you should definitely do what they're telling you to.
Seeing light at the end of the tunnel, you'll want to rip the paper off the countertops like a couple of Virgin Bible College students at the end of their wedding night. Just don't prematurely, celebrate.
Take a razor blade and score the edge of the tape where it meets the countertop. This will keep the paint from peeling off the cabinets. This paint takes a long time to fully cure, so be careful. Go ahead and put your drawers back on unless you really like my feet, in which case, pause here. Because I built my cabinet doors, I had to drill holes for the European style hinges. I used this hole boring jig to drill the recess for the hinges. It has 2 holes for the screws that mount the hinges and a depth stop for the 35mm hinge hole. Most of these hinges are highly adjustable, which is fantastic for trying to mount them. These hinges are versatile. Top, bottom, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you put the right hinge on the right door, as the offset, or how much they overlay the frame, needs to match door to cabinet. Also, because the doors were brand new, I needed to mount the hinges. I used a jig to make sure the holes were drilled exactly where I wanted them to go. And because I'm a glutton for punishment, I decided to install the floor after my cabinets were painted, which meant that part of the island would only have primer on it, and I'd need to hand paint. The good news is this paint levels really nicely. This is probably why I was dressed as a marginalized person with a highly suspicious employment agreement from a movie about the glorification of childhood torture.
So what are the lessons learned here? If you're painting a darker color, consider tinting your primer. Scratches show up less easily if the primer is tinted. You want to paint light coats, pick a pattern, and stick with it. Be robotic with your motions, and listen to your part. Hang the cabinet doors to spray them, unless you plan on buying painter's pyramids.